this edition of the Newsmakers, we ask what's behind the recent upsurge in violence in Kashmir and what it would take to bring peace to the region. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. The dispute between India and Pakistan over Kashmir has been ongoing since the time of partition. But a recent upsurge in violence has been one of the worst for several years. The situation is immensely complex, involving many different groups with competing aims and claims and deep historical grievances. Our newsmaker today is Kashmir, as we ask what's behind the recent unrest, and we also ask what it will take to end the decades-long cycle of violence.
In Srinagar, the streets are a stage for clashes. Indian forces and protesters have been fighting each other with stones, pellets and tear gas. And the consequences have been deadly. At least 80 people have died since July. This fresh round of bloodshed began when 22-year-old rebel leader Burhan Wani was killed by security forces. The Indian government considered him a terrorist, but to his supporters, he was a freedom fighter. The clashes have led to curfews in towns and cities across the region. But it hasn't stopped the violence. This month, 18 soldiers were killed in the deadliest attack on forces in Kashmir in nearly 2 decades. No one has claimed responsibility. But while the cycle of unrest continues, it's the ordinary people of Kashmir who are paying the price, while everyday life has been put on hold. Kashmir's tensions go back to the partition of Pakistan and India, when the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir was carved up between the two nations. Some territory in the north came under the control of China. The area remaining under Indian control comprises 3 regions: Jammu, which is Hindu majority, the Kashmir Valley, which is Muslim majority, and the sparsely populated Ladakh, which is a mix of Muslims, Buddhists and Hindus. In 1948, the UN Security Council passed a resolution saying the people of Kashmir should decide which country they join, that the question of the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India or Pakistan should be decided through the democratic method of a free and impartial plebiscite. But there were conditions attached, and the promised referendum never happened. And the heavily patrolled line of control has served as a de facto border ever since. With neither side willing to let go of its interests and other groups calling for an independent state, the waiting game has been bloody on all sides. But will this latest round of clashes do anything to change the status quo? Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, we're going to get deeper into the debate on the issues in just a moment, but for the latest on the situation on the ground, I'm joined from Srinagar by journalist Parvez Bukhari. Parvez, thanks so much for joining us. Tell me what it's like right now on the ground in Kashmir.
See, it's been more than 2 months, 2.5 months that the place is under a lockdown. We witnessed a series of communication blockouts, and between newspapers were also banned for a few days. Shops, schools, banks, all business establishments, everything is on hold. People are protesting. People are protesting against Indian rule. Like your news story said, they're demanding they be asked what should their future be. The fact of the matter is that underneath in Kashmir all the time, even when you have quote-unquote peaceful periods, there is a firmament of anti-India sentiment that is growing all the time. And it's always, ready to burst, waiting for a trigger. That's precisely what happened July 8th, when a popular young rebel leader was killed in a gunfight with government forces. And ever since then, it's been protests and clashes and a heavy security crackdown on the population in Kashmir. We've seen long curfews, perhaps longest in the last 26 years, ever since an armed rebellion in the 1990s erupted here. And this time around, although we've seen cycles after cycles of protestations, if you see from 1990, then we saw huge public mobilizations, unarmed protests by hundreds of thousands of Kashmiri people in 2008 and then 2010, and there was again a period of calm, and this year it erupted again. But the problem has been that the Indian state has been enhancing security measures to put the public protestation down. There have been very little or no political measures to address the fundamental political dispute over Kashmir, and that's precisely what Kashmiri people are asking for.
Pervez, thank you so much for that update. We look forward to talking to you again in the not too distant future. Pervez Bukhari joining us there from Kashmir. Now let's broaden out this debate. Joining me now from New Delhi is Deputy Resident Editor of the Hindu newspaper, Suhasini Haider. And from London, I'm joined by Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur. He's the president of the Kashmir Institute of International Affairs. Thanks both of you for joining us. Suhasini Haider, let me start with you. It's a bad situation on the ground. More than 80 people killed, thousands wounded. Those pellets are causing horrible injuries on the ground. We're seeing particularly very young people getting hurt by them. Are Indian forces being reckless and trigger happy, or is the deadly use of force at the moment in Kashmir justified?
But just to start with, I do want to make the point that you're asking a journalist from India as opposed to somebody who represents the government or the security forces. I do want to make that clear.
Absolutely.
I do think that, in Kashmir, particularly given the kind of interest there is, given the kind of interest there is from India, from international media agencies as well, there is a tendency to look very, very closely at what is going on. But what we do know is that there is at the same time an internal protest, and Pervez spoke about that there are people who are very angry with the government and how the security forces have behaved over there. And at the same time, there is a very tense border with Pakistan on one side, a slightly less tense border with China on the other in that very state. And at the same time, there is what India calls cross-border terror, militants who are able to infiltrate from Pakistan and come into Jammu and Kashmir and carry out attacks there.
Sure.
I'm not making up these figures.
No,
there
absolutely.
have been 23 such attacks
Sure.
on security
So,
forces.
but I just want to separate it out for a
years.
second. Just for a second. So let's put
Exactly.
India.
So
Sure,
it's
let's just park off
necessary- it is
India
necessary
and
to
Pakistan.
separate.
Sure, let's park off India and Pakistan and their tensions for the moment. And let's just go very specifically then to the protests. And yes, they might be rock throwing, for example, from many young people. I go back to my question again. Is the deadly use of force by the Indian Army and the security forces there on the ground, is that justified?
Well, justified is, again, it's a sort of a value judgment. I definitely think it's excessive. I definitely think that security forces should not be even using guns, because in other parts of the country we have seen security forces taking on large mobs that are very angry and using only a stick, perhaps, and tear gas alone. We are told, though, that the situation warranted more force. Even so, the fact that pellet guns were used at such short distance from those protesters seems to have affected horrific injuries there in Kashmir and on those protesters. We're looking at figures, upwards of 80 who have been killed because of those. So the short answer to your question is I can't say justified or not, because that only the security forces on the ground can really say properly. But it certainly, from a Delhi perspective, seems excessive.
Okay, Muzzammil Ayyub Thakur, to what extent have things changed on the ground in Kashmir since the killing of that popular rebel commander that Pervez Bukhari mentioned, Burhan Wani, in July? And how does this situation right now, in your opinion, compare to previous tensions, particularly when we look back to 2008 and so on?
Well, it's interesting. I was in Kashmir in 2008 as well as 2010, and then again in 2014 when we had the floods, and then again after Burhan Wani was martyred. In each case, it has been exactly the same thing when it comes to the state oppression against the people, and that is using extremely high-handedness against the civilian population. We're talking about a curfew of 82 days where electricity has been banned in certain areas, water banned, food banned, medicine banned. People are unable to get food, people are unable to go to the hospitals. The ambulances are beaten and thrashed badly where they can no longer be used, and even the attendants that are with the patients in the ambulances are also beaten, and some are even killed. So these are the current situations in Kashmir where you cannot. Not only are you being martyred, not only are you being killed by the so-called security forces, but then you are unable to take them to, for example, the hospital or even to the graveyard to be buried. We are unable to bury our own dead. We have had to do it in the middle of the night. We cannot travel. We cannot purchase food. There is no money in Kashmir at the moment. I mean, and it's right now it is a humanitarian disaster. I mean, when we talk about the Gaza siege or the blockades, this is exactly what's happening in Kashmir for the last 82 days.
Muzzammil, Suhasini mentioned the tensions with Pakistan, particularly, you know, they've been ratcheted up after the Uri attack in Kashmir, which left 17 Indian soldiers dead. The Indian government pins the blame on Pakistan because it says it was committed by a group that is harbored or you know, given refuge within Pakistan, and they claim that the Pakistanis are backing this group. Let me ask you a very direct question then, Muzzammil. Do you believe that Pakistan helps or hinders the cause of the Kashmiris in the valley who are protesting?
Well, let me ask you another question. Has anybody actually heard what the Kashmiris are actually asking for? I mean, we are seeing people on the streets in the millions protesting with flags, with banners, with statements, with stones. Young children as young as 4 years old have been pellet-ridden from their head to their toe. So clearly we are in a position to dictate terms to the world about what we want. Where Pakistan comes into this or India comes into this is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that we are one of the longest standing issues on the United Nations agenda. There have been resolutions passed in the United Nations where even India have been present, and it was India that took the issue to the United Nations. So what I'm saying is that the issue of Kashmir is in the hands of the Kashmiris, is in the hands of the population. There is nobody that can dictate the terms to us, and there is nobody that can hinder us as long as we are unified, and we are unified, and we have been unified since the day that we were occupied.
Yeah.
Now my point,
Sure.
my fundamental point, is that we have been asking for the right to decide. We have been asking for the basic rights of humans.
Right.
Democracy. We have been asking for freedoms. We have been asking for liberties, things that the entire West holds very dear to them. We're not asking for anything more, anything less than anybody else has.
Okay, Suhasini wants to come in. Suhasini?
No, I just want, you know, this continuous reference to the UN and to the demands of the Kashmiri people for independence, you know, I understand the human tragedy aspect of it, but even the story that your reporter put out there shows the 1948 resolution and referred to the fact that Kashmiris should be asked whether they want to go to India or to Pakistan. Now, firstly, that was 70 years ago, so I don't know whether we can still continue to work on that basis 70 years later, given that the ground position has changed as much as it has. Secondly, if your reporter had done a little more research, she would have seen that that resolution also calls for Pakistan first to vacate the portion of Kashmir that its
Sure.
troops hold
There
today.
were conditions to that resolution, sure. And okay,
Before
fair
we
enough.
get to that situation.
Fair
But
enough.
the choice has always been India or Pakistan. The idea of independence is not there in the UN resolution, and you know, and I'm sorry to sound heartless about it, but it is not an option.
Well, no, well, hold
given
on.
that Kashmir is a landlocked.
Hold on, I think there is a
landlocked
nuanced way, Suhasini. I mean, there was a UN Security Council Resolution 47 of 1948, August 1948. Yes, it did say that the Kashmiris have the right to choose. You're absolutely right that some of the conditions involved Pakistan vacating their third of Kashmir or their part of Kashmir. Let me pose that to Muzzammil. Muzzammil, when an Indian says that referendum can't happen because it was 70 years ago, and also because of subsequent wars and agreements between India and Pakistan, that makes that referendum, or the potential for that referendum, and the very existence of that that potential referendum and that UN Security Council resolution, it makes it moot. Muzzammil, how do you respond to that?
Well, if it makes it moot, then India should go back to the United Nations and suggest the third option of independence. If that is the argument, then then so be it. let them have the third
The
option of
argument is
independence. But the
let
fact of the matter is the
Pakistan
same thing.
fulfill the
It doesn't matter.
commitments
Please, Ms. Haider, please, allow me to... I gave you the respect to speak. Allow me the respect to speak. The fact of the matter is there are gross human rights violations. India is part of the United Nations and wish to be part of the United Nations Security Council. How can they be part of the United Nations Security Council when there are gross, mass human rights violations? To the extent that I would say there are war crimes happening in Kashmir. There are severe war crimes happening in Kashmir. So regardless of India and Pakistan, the United Nations, if you don't want to use that argument, fine, so be it. But at least allow a referendum, a plebiscite to happen in Kashmir and allow the population to decide what they want. If you say that the UN resolutions are defunct, then to that extent, allow the Indian government to allow a third option into a plebiscite. At least have the plebiscite. Even if you are negating the United Nations, have the plebiscite.
Suhasini?
It's very simple. You're changing the goalpost. If you are referring to the United Nations, then according to that resolution, Pakistan must vacate its territory or the territory that it occupies of Kashmir before we can
Why
get
are
into
you
any
obsessed
talk
with
about a
Pakistan?
referendum. I am
Please
not
deal with
obsessed
your
with
own
Pakistan. I'm
troubles
telling you
and
what
your
is in
own
the
problems
UN
first.
resolution.
Leave Pakistan aside.
What is in the UN resolution? If you want to speak ab initio about a freedom movement inside Kashmir, then that has to then be recorded alongside many other freedom movements around the world that haven't yet gone anywhere. I could refer to the Kurdish problem there in Turkey as well. The fact is that if you want to go back to the UN resolution, then you've got to follow the first tenet of that UN resolution. If you don't think that first tenet is possible...
Yes, demilitarization. Why don't you begin the demilitarization yourself then?
Why don't you read the UN resolution? It says Pakistan has to do it first, and India has to satisfy itself that Pakistan has vacated that portion of
Take the initiative. Take the initiative.
Okay, I apologize. We are out of time. I've got to wrap. Suhasini and Muzzammil, thank you very much for joining us.